Shalom Aleichem. It is my pleasure to welcome Rabbi Shnayor Burton to discuss the topic being learned at the end of Ksubis. The Gemara mentions Shalosh Shvuos. Now, many people, when they hear those words, right away their mind goes to Satmar, Shalosh Shvuos, anti-Zionist living in Eretz Yisrael. There is so much written and so much to listen to watch online and everywhere else about Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, about the Shalosh Shvuos. Our good friend Tzviki Rubenfeld pointed out that Rabbi Burton has a podcast called The Great Sources. Season 2 has 28 episodes on this topic. We really goes through it well. The sources, the history, the sugyas of the Shalosh Shvuos in Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. So he suggested bringing on Rabbi Burton, and he acquiesced to come on and join us for half an hour, 45 minutes. We'll try not to keep it much longer than that to discuss this. Rabbi Burton, as I mentioned, has the podcast. I heard him on with Nachi Weinstein and Sparm Chatter discussing this topic. He has a sefer forthcoming called Oret Asher Eka coming out soon. And we hope to have a little bit of clarification, maybe something new on the topic of the Iker Shalosh Shvuos. Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, I think we'll leave out for now. Rabbi Burton, how are you today? Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure to be here. Moshe, it's really nice to be here to talk about this topic, which is near and dear to my heart, near and dear to every Yid's heart, I think, is Eretz Yisrael. Just to make a slight correction, my series of shurim is about Yishuv Eretz Yisrael in general, the mitzvah. A part of that, an important part of that, is these Gemaras about this idea that Hashem made, he made us swear, placed an oath on Bnei Yisrael that we shouldn't go back to Eretz Yisrael en masse, B'choima, and the various other shvuos. This is such an important topic, and I relish the opportunity to talk about it, to teach people about it, to educate about it. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so thank you. I guess for starters, maybe tell us what the Shalosh Shvuos are, and is this the place in Talmud Bavli where it's mentioned? Is this the most that we'll get? Is Ksubis Daf Kuf Yud Aleph on this topic?
This is it. So you have to pay attention here, or else you miss it. This Gemara that's shocking in its severity. The Gemara says that there's a bunch of oaths, and we'll talk about the specifics of what these oaths are. That if Bnei Yisrael is going to transgress these oaths, Hashem is going to make their flesh hefker, like wild game, which is a kind of expression of a punishment that we don't find anywhere, anything close to that in Chazal, right? Basically saying, okay, what the punishment for this Aveira, let's call it for now, or whatever this is about, is that your lives become hefker, and people will hunt you down. So this is a mind-boggling thing. And of course, Eretz Yisrael being so central to the Torah, when you get to the Gemara like this, you want to think about, what's this about? Why is Hashem making this oath that we shouldn't retake Eretz Yisrael? And I want to talk about the Shalosh Shvuos. Everyone calls it the Shalosh Shvuos, the three oaths, which is interesting because if you learn the Gemara, the Daf, it actually turns into 6. Because the Gemara says that the oaths are based on the text in Shir Hashirim, where it says, Ishbati estem, B'nai Yisrael, B'nai Yushalayim, Hashem makes an oath on the B'nai Yushalayim, Im ta'iru es ha'avat shetechbas, not to arouse the love until it's time. And the Gemara says, well, it says, Im ta'iru, double lashon, so therefore the 3 turn into 6. Another version, in the Talmud Bavli, this is the only place you'll find it. The other place where it's discussed at length is in the Medrash Shir Hashirim Rabbah, and some other minor Midrash and Medrash Zuto of Shir Hashirim mentions it too. And there are various versions in the Shir Hashirim Rabbah according to Amanama. There's 4 oaths, and sort of depends on how you interpret, how you darshan Shir Hashirim. But so I'll just list out what the Shvuos are as they appear in the Gemara, as they appear in the Talmud Bavli, so we should know what the really 6 Shvuos are. And then just parenthetically, the reason why it's famous as a Shalosh Shvuos is because Satmarov's Sefer V'Yoel Moshe, where he decries the Zionist enterprise of capturing Eretz Yisrael or making a state, he named the Sefer the Shalosh Shvuos. Okay, and this is sort of a question: why did he call it the Shalosh Shvuos, given that there are 4 or 6? So perhaps he meant to focus on only a few of them. That's very detailed question there. So what are the 6 Shvuos? So one of them is Shelo Yalu Yisrael B'choima. that Yisrael shouldn't come up b'chayma or kachayma. Is a question of the girsa here. Is it like as a wall or b'chayma? Which is a very interesting expression. It means something like coming up with force. Rashi says yachad biyad chazaka, together with force. So Bnei Yisrael shouldn't come back to Eretz Yisrael en masse, all as one with some sort of power. That Bnei Yisrael shouldn't rebel. And that another one is to the Goyim, that they shouldn't be Meshabed Bnei Yisrael Yosimidai. They shouldn't make Bnei Yisrael work too hard in Golos, that we shouldn't reveal the Kates, that we shouldn't distance Yirchakus Kates. Another Girsa Rashi is Yidchakus Kates. We shouldn't try to hasten the Kates. And Shlo Yigalu Hasoid, that we shouldn't reveal the secret. It's a little bit cryptic. Of course, what the last one is, and a lot of these are sort of vague. Shlo Yidchakus Kates, Shlo Yirchakus Kates. What does that mean? But clearly, this is about something about our relationship in Galus, or how we're supposed to live in Galus, how we're supposed to relate to being in Galus, and how the nations are supposed to relate to us.
Perhaps you'll get to this when you discuss the severity, and you mentioned a little bit, is the fact that it's a shvua different than a regular life. It's interesting that we talk about something that you're not allowed to do as a shvua. Is that just the way Shir Hashirim Shlomo HaMelech placed the language, or is it something different than a regular Isser, a regular life?
Right. Well, see, but something very important to understand is that we're dealing with Agada de Gemara. This is not halacha, in the sense that, in the simple sense that it's mentioned nowhere in the Mishnah or the Rambam, nowhere in the Shulchan Aruch as a matter of halacha. It's an Agada de Gemara. It's a reading of Shir Hashirim, right? And to understand how we read this into Shir Hashirim, in other words, to understand what the medrash over here is, you have to understand how Chazal understand Shir Hashirim, because Shir Hashirim is about the relationship between us and Hashem, and it's ultimately about the idea that we will eventually come back together with Hashem, but there's a right time for that. And of course, the mashal is a man and a man and the woman that he loves, and it's a conversation between them. So, but that's not halacha. This is medrash. This is agada. Now, that is in no way to minimize it. Obviously, if the Gemara says that the result of this is that Bnei Yisrael will be hefker, so obviously we're dealing with a terrible and dangerous thing. But to your question about, okay, this is a shvua, what exactly is it? It's not a shvua. It's not an oath in any sense that anyone would say that you actually get the avera of being over a shvua here, because we're dealing with a reading of Shir Hashirim.
So it may not even be something which is the Raisa, the Rabbanon. I'm sure you discussed this more in the halachic aspect of it in your lengthy episodes on your podcast. I don't know if you want to get into it here.
Well, that's the question. The weird question is, okay, so what are we talking about? I mean, you think about it like this. You read a Gemara like this, and I mean, of course, whenever you read a Gemara, you have to pause and think. But you read a Gemara that says that there's a shvuah that we shouldn't retake Eretz Yisrael. And I want to tell you another version of that, in fact, makes it even more shvuah. The one version of this in the Medrashut of Shir Hashirim is that there's a shvuah against us rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. Okay? Which is, of course, very similar to what the Gemara says. It's basically something about hastening the end, the gates, coming back to Eretz Yisrael. And the other is, don't build the Beis HaMikdash until you hear a voice from heaven. Because the pasuk says, the pasuk prior to this talks about the koil daiti. So you have to hear the voice from heaven, and then you know it's time. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, to build the Beis HaMikdash is a mitzvah say in the Torah. It's a mitzvah say like shaking a lulav. Of course, only when the right circumstances hold, and of course only when it's possible. But similarly, living in Eretz Yisrael, according to the Ramban counts living in Eretz Yisrael as one of the Taryag mitzvahs. Even if you don't hold like the Ramban, and this is something I discuss in my forthcoming Sefer, and I discuss at length in the Shurim there on the podcast. Even if you don't hold like the Ramban, living in Eretz Yisrael is still as the Ar Gadol, the Mitzvah Gadol calls it, it's still a mitzvah rabbah takifa v'alemta. It's still a very great mitzvah. The whole Torah is full of it. It's clearly a very important thing. It might not be technically one of the minyan ha-mitzvahs, and there's what to talk about that. Why it's not part of the minyan ha-mitzvahs doesn't matter. If it's not part of the minyan ha-mitzvahs, given that it's so central to the Torah. Maybe it doesn't. But it is very important, right? And here you have this thing that, okay, well, don't go back to Eretz Yisrael. But now, again, according to Ramban, we're talking strict halach over here. According to Ramban, it's a mitzvah say, one of the Torah mitzvahs, which you must do according to the rules of that mitzvah. If I want to know if I should take a lulav or not, I have to look at Hilchos Lulav. Is it the time to take a lulav? What does it mean to take a lulav? And I just got to do it. There can't be, there's some external isser to do something which is a mitzvah, and certainly building the Beis Hamikdash is a mitzvah, one of the Targum mitzvahs that holds under certain circumstances. But then, well, if we could build a Beis Hamikdash today, and the right circumstances hold for that, we know if we would know the Makam HaMizbech, etc., etc., etc. If we would have Roy B'nai Yisrael, there's various reasons why we might not have a mitzvah today. But if we did have a mitzvah to build the Beis Hamikdash, then what's this business of a shavua, of an isser, of this is the worst avera? How could it be the worst avera? That's the basic problem. Besides what are Chazal doing over here, being so strict, but just even more basic. What is this about? What is this about? An isser to do mitzvahs, to do the most important mitzvahs, to bring the Shekhinah down to the Beis Hamikdash for Bnei Yisrael to live in Etzor, which is Shkula Keneg Kol HaMitzvahs, right? And right here we have this in this Gemara, in the sugi of talking how important it is living in Etzor, and I say, okay, but wait a second, it's actually the biggest avera for us to do. How do we square that? That's the most basic issue. So I think maybe I should present since the Satmar is the one who wrote all about this. Okay, I want to present his opinion first, but then I want to present what to me is more important to know, which is something that the Rambam writes about this very topic in Igeres Teimon. What's really fascinating is that in all the Rishonim, there's no indication what this is about. And whenever you hear someone make these kind of categorical statements, like nowhere in the Rishonim does it say X, Y, Z, you have to take that with a few grains of salt. And I might be wrong. Of course, there is no such thing as reviewing all the literature of the Rishonim, because there are things in manuscript, things that are being discovered. But in this case, there's a fellow who made a website called Yalkut Hishpati Eschem, which, as you can imagine, is about the Shavuos. And he's a real Satmar, and he collected all the literature about the Shavuos. And it's amazing what he did. It's an amazing job. He has, let's say, Tkufas HaChazal, hundreds of pages, meaning each statement and a little bit of a hesber. And then he goes to the Ga'ainim and Rishainim, later Rishainim, Achrainim. And I'm talking about thousands and thousands of pages. And I am so appreciative of what he did, although I think it's a little bit of a misplaced effort. We'll get to that. We'll get to that soon as we explore what the Shavuos are about. But I'm so appreciative because it put everything in one place, and I went through everything because I wanted to see, do the Rishonim actually help us understand what this is about? And as I mentioned, there is one Rishon, the Rambam in Igeres Teimon, which tells us what this is all about, and it just illuminates everything about the sugya. But since the Satmar wrote the Sefer Shalosh Shavuos, and I think, as you said, that's where everyone's mind goes when you learn this Gemara, everyone knows about that. So I want to present his opinion. So the Satmar's idea is like this: why is this the worst thing in the world? So his idea is as follows, and as you can see, I don't really hold of it. I'm going to try to present it as best as I can, which I do in my Sefer. And you should know, I learned through this Inyan with for a couple of years with it, not just Shalosh Shavuos, the whole topic. But since it's such a sensitive topic, right? I was very careful to try to go in without any biases. And just want to say that in my favor. And in fact, I was, in a certain sense, had proclivities to the Satmar approach, but after studying it and turning it over and speaking to people who are expert in Vilna Moshe, I've reached personally a conclusion not like the Satmar. But let me first present his opinion. He says the following. He says that the idea of the Shavuos, the idea of the oaths, is that the belief in Mashiach and the belief in a certain kind of miraculous redemption that's going to happen after Bnei Yisrael does tshuva is of such importance that taking steps that suggest that we're going to replace a miraculous redemption with some sort of human redemption, that's the biggest sin. Because our belief that Hashem is going to redeem us is paramount, is so important, so central, and therefore there's this great severity in taking these kinds of steps. That's his idea in a nutshell, and it's a real nutshell because he wrote a whole sefer about that. But basically, it's three parts. Hashem has to do it, not humans. It has to happen after Bnei Yisrael does tshuva, so we can't try to do things beforehand. And Mashiach has to happen through Mashiach and not otherwise. So
perhaps he'll address this. But besides for Mashiach, which may also be subjective, are the first two perhaps subjective? What's called Hashem doing it and not
Yes.
humans? What's called that it happens?
Yes, exactly. He doesn't define it in his Sefer. He doesn't define. Okay, fine. He reads that into a medrash, whatever you accept that reading or not, that something has to happen like that, Kadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmai. But as you pointed out, he doesn't define that, and that's a very tricky thing to define. I mean, and I mentioned this in my Sefer, and the Rambam, the Moreh Nevuchim, has a parak where he shows that in a certain sense, every single thing that happened can be called Hashem did it. That's the last parak of the second Chelek, because everything of the Moreh Nevuchim, everything is traceable back to Hashem. So what do you mean when you say Hashem ba'atzmai? It doesn't define that. Okay, so that's maybe it's undefined, but what's more tricky, and if you're listening well to the way I presented it, it's such a subtle argument that the Satmar was making, because see, it's a principle of faith that Mashiach will come, and according to Satmar, that means the principle of faith that there will be a redemption of a certain sort in the future, which means then that there will not be an alternative redemption. It will not happen. Okay, because if you believe that believing in the coming of Mashiach in a certain way precludes other things happening, like the nation going back to Eretz together, like us going back to Eretz before we do tshuva, like humans doing something instead of Hashem's doing something, as difficult as that is to define. If you believe that, that means that won't happen, right? So if that won't happen, then what exactly are we doing wrong? We're clearly not replacing it. In other words, whatever we are doing, or whatever the Jewish nation has done when they established a state, let's say, cannot be, by definition, it cannot be a replacement for what Mashiach is going to do, according to Satmar, because he believes that Emunah Shlema, that Mashiach will do it, and not Ben Gurion. That's it, right? So then he didn't do it. So then how could you, so what's the problem? What's he doing wrong? So it's very subtle. His idea is that, well, if you're approaching it in a certain way, you're indicating that you don't believe Hashem will do it, which becomes sort of a weak argument, because maybe I believe Hashem will do it, but I want to do what I can. And one of the things I discussed in my Sefer and on the Shura, Mashiach is let's say the way the Rambam describes Mashiach is going to gather everyone together, rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, and he's going to bring about that all of Bnei Yisrael does Torah mitzvahs, serves Hashem. Now, no one ever argued that someone is engaging in kirov, or not even kirov chaykim, just engaging in making Yidden serve Hashem more, is usurping the role of Mashiach, because no, that's Mashiach's job, right? Mashiach is the one who's going to make everyone close to Hashem. Yeah, Mashiach will make everyone close to Hashem. And Mashiach will bring back Kol Nidchei Yisrael. And Mashiach will rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. But to say that, therefore, any elements of that are accessible to us today, in our current state, before we have that full redemption of Mashiach, to say that any elements of that are off limits because you're usurping the role of Mashiach is a very strange argument. It's almost untenable. Hard to say. And of course, the degree of severity, okay, so fine. One of the beliefs is Mashiach, but to say, okay, therefore Hashem will make us hefker like animals, something doesn't add up. Something is still not fully explained.
So is there a counter approach or something in between which I guess is how you'll understand, or others, based on others, what the Shalosh
are?
So
that's what I want to get to. I mean, there's a lot more to talk about the Satmar, but the Satmar approach, there's a lot of details, a lot of specific questions. I think I presented basically what it is, and the core deficiency with it. There's cautious on it, but the core problem with working it out is the point, what I pointed out. So it's fascinating that the Rambam in the Geras Teimon actually indicates what the Shavuos are about, according to the Rambam. And like I said, we don't find anyone that argues. The Rambam's approach explains everything, not just why the Shavuos, what the Shavuos are about, and why they're supposed to be, but also the cheshbon and the sugya, which we won't go into here. But again, I'll reference you to the Shirin. The Rambam's approach is just so illuminating. And what's fascinating is that Satmar quotes this Geras Teimon on page 1 of the introduction to the Sefer, and yet doesn't take it to its logical conclusion. Let me tell you what the Rambam says in the Geras Teimon. The Rambam writes this letter to the Jews in Yemen who were persecuted, and he's encouraging them and telling it's an amazing letter. I don't have to. It doesn't need my haskama. At the end of the letter, he warns against false messiahs, and the Rambam tells them that the following, and you have to listen closely. He says Shlomo HaMelech knew that this nation, Bnei Yisrael, is going to stir themselves out of exile before the time, and that therefore they would suffer for that. Therefore, he made an oath as a mashal and said Hishbatias. So let's repeat that, because you have to follow the logic here. Because Shlomo Melech knew Baruch Kadshay, that Bnei Yisrael will stir and try to raise themselves out of Galus before it's the time, and that they're going to suffer for that. He warned them against that and made a Shavuah al derech Moshel saying Hishbati Yasu. So what the Rambam is saying is, the reason why Bnei Yisrael are going to suffer when they try to get out of Galus is not because of the Shavuah, it's the opposite. Shlomo Melech knew that Bnei Yisrael are going to try to get out of Galus before the time, and it's going to end up backfiring, and they're going to suffer. So he warned them against it and said a mashal. This gets back to the point you're raising before. According to Rambam, this oaths are not even, they're just a mashal. And he said Ishpati Estem. And he ends and he says, my brothers in Yemen, keep the oath and don't be ma'ir the law v'achetechbats. So what the Rambam is saying is that Shlomo Melech is aware of a certain reality. And once you start thinking about this, you realize, yes, this is so obvious. There's a reality that the position of the Jewish people among the nations of the world is a very delicate and unstable position, right? Because here we believe that one day Mashiach will come and all the attendant glories that are going to come along with that. Okay, which is why the Messianic idea is dangerous, it's revolutionary, and of course it's threatening to the rest of the world. So if we try to push for that before it's time, and let me tell you what before it's time means. Before it doesn't mean anything esoteric. It means if we try to push for that before the world is ready for that, you know what's going to happen? Anti-Semitism. They're going to hunt us down like game. So the Gemara, according to the Rambam, is an Agada, the Gemara, reflective of some underlying truth, a very important truth that we should never forget. Because see, we tend to forget that because some people think, no, you know what? If we're going to Eretz Yisrael and we're doing good things and we're rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem is going to protect us. Everything's going to be fine. Hashem's going to be on our side, even though it looks so risky, and even though according to maybe geopolitics, it's a bad move, it's a dangerous move, and maybe the Jews are better off keeping a low profile in exile for simple social and political reasons. People might think, no, Hashem wants us to do this, we're going to have Siyata D'Shmaya, and everything's going to be fine. That's what this Shavuos teach us. That you have to understand there's a right time and a wrong time. And again, that we have to be repeating. We don't mean a right time and a wrong time in some sort of esoteric sense. That, you have to be able to read the plans of Hashem. The plans of Hashem are apparent to the reality. And if the reality is such that, according to logic, according to basic political calculations, the world will not take kindly to this kind of Jewish independence, then you better not push it. As much as, so that's why we live with this tension, because on the one hand, of course, we have to teach and talk about the fact that we're Mechaka Mashiach B'Chalim Sheyaveh. On the other hand, this Gemara warns us, don't underestimate how volatile, how dangerous that could be, and how volatile your position is. So that's in a nutshell.
I'm asking this question again. Well, the question that I'm asking is from without learning the sugya, listening even to your 28th shiurim on it. According to the Rambam, is it also something which is subjective? Someone may say, well, I feel, now's the time. So what I'm doing is based on
Yeah.
I'm in agreement with the Rambam, but I still feel, according to my calculations, now's the right time.
So here's where things get really interesting. I mean, basically, according to the Rambam, the Gemara is reflecting reality. Okay? Which reality, again, we are quite familiar with this reality. Right? It's almost, you almost don't need the Gemara to tell us this, but that's why my point was that the Gemara is telling us not to think that somehow we could transcend the basic facts of being of what it's like to be Jewish. That's what the Gemara is warning us against. So the Gemara is about a reality, right? So let's say a person would say, as you suggested, okay, look, it's 2022, whatever, or 1948, and I think things are different now. Okay? And he says, look, yes, the most important chasidus, the most important thing in the world is Jewish blood. And that's why this is the worst Avera, because it's Sakas Nefashis. And not just Sakas Nefashis for individuals, Sakas Nefashis for the nation. Yes, makes perfect sense. So let's say a person, looks at it that way. And he says, now it's different, right? So that's not an invalid statement. That's in and of itself, because we're talking about realities. And if you think the reality is such that it's safe, let's talk about that. The one issue a person might say, well, Chazal are teaching us something over here. They're telling us maybe not to think this time is different. Maybe that's the point of the Shavuos, right? So you sort of have to figure out like what exactly do Chazal mean as presenting an Agada in a certain formal way, right? If Chazal would just say, guys, don't forget, be careful. Okay, I'm being careful. This is careful, right? But here we have this, it's read into a pasuk, and it's written in a very formal way. So what does that mean for action? And this kind of question gets into very, very complex issues such as how to understand Agada, and whether we have to act according to Agada in such a way. I want to give you an example of just an amazing thing that the Netziv wrote a letter about in the early, the end of the 19th century about the early settlement of Eretz Yisrael. And this is just one approach, really, where he talks about that we should be mis'orer. We should wake up to the koil that's being heard from one end of the world to the other. The koil of let's go back to Eretz Yisrael. So obviously what he's saying is that, yes, there's a shvuah until, as I mentioned before, the Medrash says, until you hear the voice from heaven. But this is Agada. So what's the voice from heaven? So the Netziv says, I hear the voice from heaven. If Bnei Yisrael is being mis'orer to go back, that's a voice from heaven. So, getting to your question, that's not saying this time is different? That's saying, no, there's a limit to these shvuos. The shvuos are ad shetechbats, until Hashem wants, or which might mean until Hashem arouses us, and there's a mass interest in Eretz Yisrael, until you hear a voice from heaven, which in the Tziv's interpretation means this kind of movement where all of a sudden everyone's just talking about Eretz Yisrael when it was laying dormant for 1,000 years. I have a theory that Yehuda Levi Sefer, the Kuzvi, is like a voice from heaven. I mean, if you learn that Sefer and his love for Eretz Yisrael, it comes out, and that's a voice from heaven. You can call it Ruach HaKodesh, perhaps. And, so that gets very tricky. How do you apply it? But the point you're making is correct, which is that once we're talking about reality here, where realities change. And of course, you don't judge a reality based on a Gemara. You judge a political reality, you judge it based on the facts on the ground. You might, though, get to that question of, like I said, if the Gemara is putting this forth as a Gemara, are we supposed to just say, well, it's different? So that's where we get to something like the Netziv that says, no, we're hearing the voice from heaven. There are sources that say that the Shavuos are only there for 1,000 years. Sources in Kabbalah, and there's also a basis for that in the Medrash that's very complicated. Which, by the way, brings us to the time of Yehuda Levi, who basically called for a return to Eretz Yisrael. It was the first one. The first time you'll find in the literature saying in so many words, how come we're not going back to Eretz Yisrael, is in the end of the 11th century, Yehuda Levi, which is 1,000 years after the Churban. So that happens to work out too.
If you want to hear a little bit more about Yehuda Levi, Eliezer Brut discussed it in an episode that we have on All Daf before Tisha B'Av. Again, like you said, Kuzri is a huge sugya, and this whole sugya itself, but he brought it, discussing, leading up to the legend,
right.
Whether, he actually came to Eretz Yisrael and fell on Har Bayis and got trampled on by some Arab horse rider. So he discussed it over there.
Right. In one of the series of shurim I gave on this topic, and I was talking about Yehuda Levi's call to go back to Israel, and someone said, well, but he went back and he got killed. So what does that say about, what does that mean he was wrong? It's an interesting question. So I didn't have, I knew it may not even be true, but I mentioned then that, okay, it's an interesting question. How do you interpret that legend? Like, what's the medrash of that story if it happens? How do we understand it?
Right. And I'm sure, and which is not a topic for now, exactly what is defined called going back. Like Rashi says, biyad of chazaka, what exactly does that mean? How are you over on the Shavuos? I don't know if you want to get into that now. So just one more question. You tell me if you want to get into this or discuss, were there times throughout history where the actual oaths were violated? I know that there are midrashim and shashurim that discuss this. I've heard from you. If maybe you want to discuss either one of these two.
Yes, I just want to say a word about the first one. So you said Rashi says Yachad b'yad chazaka, together of Yachad. So you have a lot of literature about exactly what does it mean to transgress the oaths. Now, after we have the Rambam Migeres Teman, that sort of becomes a moot point because, see, the Shavuos are a broad idea, and there's 6 of them, and they're basically about the same thing, about our relationship with the nations. Let's say, don't rebel against the nations, right? If the Shavuos, considering that the Rambam understands the Shavuos reflect Sakon Sefashis, then the question becomes what's dangerous and what's not dangerous, okay? The question is not, well, what technically is included in this term? Because this is not a lav deraisa, and this is not a shulchan aruch. They were supposed to keep it by following the letter of the law. There is no letter here. It's an idea. The idea is danger. So then the answer to your, what exactly is considered transgressing, that's not the right question. The right question is what exactly is dangerous? That's the most very important question, right? Very, very, not to minimize. That's why it's so severe. It is the most severe thing in the world. But we have to understand what the right questions are to ask. We're not supposed to approach this as the way we approach a halacha shulchan aruch. So that's very important. But parenthetically, I was mentioning that the Minsker Gadol, the Ar Gadol, also says that the Shavuos are reflect this idea of danger, and that Chazal said the Shavuos because it would be too dangerous to go back en masse. And there's a letter from Rameir Simcha where he says after the Balfour Declaration, since the nations are given permission, so he says Sor Pachad HaShavuos, the fear of the Shavuos is gone, which also indicates that the Shavuos are not an Isser. There's something scary here, something dangerous. Do we have a little time? Should we get to the second question about the history?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So
I see we have around a half an hour on the clock, so we certainly have a few more minutes.
Great. Okay. So one reading in the Medrash, as I said, as we started, there's a lot of different interpretations of the Shavuos, how many there are and what they're referring to. One reading in the Medrash is that the four mentions of the Shavuos in Shir HaShirim correspond to 4 times that they were transgressed. And I want to talk about one of them. So one of them is when they left Mitzrayim early, in Ephraim. And I want to talk about the last one that Medrash says, which is the days of Bar Kochba. So there was the Bar Kochba, because there's a lot to learn from that, for what the Shavuos mean. The Bar Kochba revolt against the Romans, where, of course, Rabbi Kiva thought, and I'm presenting the Rambam's presentation of the story, that Rabbi Kiva believed that Bar Kochba was Mashiach. And the Rambam says until Bar Kochba was killed, and they knew that he wasn't Mashiach. So, and the Rambam explains in Nuchs Malachim, the Rambam says that there's basically halachas about Mashiach. The halachas are as follows. If there's someone from Beis David who rises and wages war, Mechames Hashem, and he's succeeding, then he's Becheskas Mashiach. Becheskas. He has a chazaka, he's Mashiach. It's a chazaka, it's a halachic man. Rambam, last 2 parts of Nuchs Malachim, is Hilchas Mashiach, and there's halachas about Mashiach. If he succeeds at, as we mentioned earlier, bringing Bnei Yisrael back to Hashem, gathering them back to Yisrael, building the Beis HaMikdash, then he's Mashiach B'vadai. If not, then he's Kechol Machli Beis David Aksherim. I think is the expression Rambam uses. He's like a good king, but not Mashiach, fine. And the Rambam says that Bar Kochba was Becheskas Mashiach. He was assumed by Rekiv to be Mashiach until he was proven not to be because he was killed. Now, here we go. Here the Medrash says that the tremendous bloodshed that occurred when the Romans put down the revolt and tremendous killing that happened, and the amount of Jews that died, was an illustration of this punishment that would become Hefker, right? Now, clearly, Bar Kochba did nothing wrong. Because you look at the Rambam Malachim, if someone wages the wars of Hashem, he's Becheskas Mashiach. And as Rabbi Kiva considered Bar Kochba to be Becheskas Mashiach, as the Rambam says he should. And if he succeeds, then he's Mashiach. If not, he's like a Malchei Beis David Aksherim. But this Malchei Beis David Aksherim, where everything happened according to halacha. See, people say, "Oh, Rabbi Kiva made a mistake." It's not true. Rabbi Kiva followed exactly what the Rambam said, the way Rambam's understanding. The halacha is to consider him Becheskas Mashiach until proven otherwise, which is what Rabbi Kiva did. So everything happened according to halacha in the Bar Kochba wars. He did nothing wrong, and yet the backlash, the bloody backlash, is an illustration of what happens if you transgress the Shavuos, which teaches us that transgression is sort of the wrong word. We're not talking about an avera. We're talking about a reality. The reality is that messianic aspirations are the most dangerous thing. Even though the halacha is that if someone is from Beis David, meets the criteria, he's supposed to wage the wars and supposed to be Becheskas Mashiach. But if he doesn't succeed, we're in big trouble. That's what the Shavuos reflect, see? Because it's all about a reality. It's all about understanding the position of Bnei Yisrael among the nations. And not overestimating, not being overconfident and thinking, no, we could do this because Hashem is on our side, When Hashem is on our side, we'll know it. We'll know it through, how will we know it? We'll know it through the reality. We'll know it because the world will be ready for it. And then we'll know it's the time. So that's the rich, it's not a shallower idea than the simple reading. It's actually much richer. It relates to the Metzias and understanding that Klal Yisrael has a certain role in destiny, in the history of the world. and that the other nations sort of know that. And it's sort of a dangerous position to be in for them to know that. You have to try to lay low. I speak about that in my Sefer on the Shurim. Some of the other oaths, even the oath, the last one, not to reveal the secret. According to some, Maral brings from the Medrash, and it's pretty compelling, the Medrash, it's that we're not supposed to reveal our secrets to the nations in general. Like, they're not supposed to know the secret of what it is to be a Yid, because it's a volatile secret. It's a dangerous secret. We're supposed to just have this low profile and wait. But that's about being careful.
It's amazing. We're sitting here, and thank you very much. A lot of what you said is fresh and new to me, and hopefully to many people listening. We're sitting here in 2022, the beginning of end of October, beginning of November. What's going on in the world, with the back and forth of, certain celebrities saying things and then the backlash. And it's amazing. There's things that are
it's the same thing over and over. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I appreciate it. Anything else do you want to close out with? Obviously, again, please check out the Great Sources podcast. There are 28 episodes there on these topics, and Yeshiva Eretz Yisrael.
Season 2 of the Great Sources, if you look for it.
Season 2 of the Great. I guess if you want to mention now, what have you done, and what are you currently doing?
Lots of stuff. There's lots of things going on. The Great Source is dedicated to like major topics in Hashkafa. So season 1 was different topics. It's 50 shurim on various topics. Yesodis of Hashkafa. Season 2 was about Eretz Yisrael. Season 3, I'm going through fundamental Sfarim. Went through the Kuzvi, Chavis Alavavis. Soon we're going to start the Mar Nevuchim.
At some point, perhaps you covered, I might have looked back a while ago, which is also current in the Yema Parshas Bereshis, right? Abriya Sa'ilam and
that. I mean, I have my other shurim on Chumash. I give a weekly Chumash here, so that's in another online series called the Secrets of Chumash. With Zamachim Shurim, and there's also another one called the Book of Memories. I think maybe the one you're referring to. I have a conversation, the Talmud of mine, Mikey Stone, and there we spoke about creation. That might be the one you're talking about. Lots of good stuff if you look for it. If I may give a shameless plug there.
Yes. That's what we're all about today. Anyway, okay. I appreciate it. Again, could anyone reach out to you at any email address if they have questions or
sure, I would appreciate that. Absolutely. The best one would be oros.yaakov@gmail. Maybe we'll put it in the description.
Maybe just spell it out if someone doesn't get to look at it.
Yaakov, that's the name of my first sefer, so I just haven't sent an email for that. oros.yaakov@gmail. Best place to reach me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Perhaps we'll do this again another
time.
Great
pleasure, Moshe. Really enjoyed this. Thank you.